Between the ceasefire, the ongoing hostage releases, and the freeing of terrorists from Israeli prisons, the news during this time of war is coming so fast and furious, it can be hard for Israelis to process. Our Middle East correspondent Paul Strand talked to Jerusalem Post columnist Gil Troy to get some perspective and insight on the current headlines.
We're speaking with Professor Gil Troy, Jerusalem Post columnist and author of the new book, To Resist the Academic Intifada. Gil, right now, it's such a strange and disturbing time here in Israel. We're rejoicing because some of the hostages have been freed. They're back home safe. Yet at the same time, some Israeli prisons are releasing literally hundreds of Palestinian terrorists, presumably to go back out and kill Jews again. What should Israelis and their friends be feeling right now?
Welcome to the land of the Bible. In the Bible, we learn that sometimes there's times to rejoice and sometimes there's times to mourn, and sometimes that happens simultaneously. I think the great failure today in Western civilization is we don't take the time to rejoice. And so, yes, it is so easy to go into a negative spin about October 7th. We're still mourning 1,200 people killed. We're mourning hundreds of new soldiers killed. We're mourning thousands of people wounded. You could just go deep into despair. But again and again, since October 7th, we've seen so many points of light. We've seen the support of the American people. We've seen the bravery of the Israeli soldiers. We've seen the resistance and resilience of the Israeli people. And we've also seen the joy that we take with every single human life. As painful as this moment is, I'd still rather be on the side of the people, like the Americans, like the Jews, like the Israelis, who love life and celebrate every precious life that's freed, even if it's the cost of sending hundreds of murderers right back to their terrorism.
Some more bad news here. Hamas seems back in charge in Gaza. Hezbollah seems to be trying to weasel their way back into southern Lebanon, just across the border from Israel. Iran is racing pell-mell to get their hands on nuclear weapons, develop them. And much of the world is attempting to criminalize Israel for defending itself against all these, horrible foes. Can Israel survive? Can it somehow win against all this evil?
Since May, we've seen Hezbollah humiliated, Iran weakened. We've seen Hamas further degraded. And so even though Hamas is celebrating, they're celebrating in ruins. Even though Hamas is celebrating, they've lost over 20,000 of their top terrorists. So I am obviously worried, but I'm also rejoicing because thanks again to American support and to Israeli grit, we have seen a change.
Donald Trump is urging Muslim nations to take in scores of Palestinians in Gaza, yet the world seems dead set against letting any Gazans out of there. Why?
Palestinians get a pass, and much of the Arab world gets a pass. It's very interesting. Long before President Trump returned to office, I was wondering, Gaza shares a border with Egypt. Why is Israel only responsible for bringing in aid? Why is Israel only responsible for what goes on in Gaza? Why isn't Egypt? And so we see as this strange double standard. And lo and behold, once again, the double standard falls on the Jew. So yes, they criminalize the Jew, now the collective Jew Israel, when we try to defend ourselves. They criminalize the Jew, now the collective Jew Israel, when we say, wait a minute, what are we going to do with these people who want to hate us? And what's very, very interesting, though, this isn't coming from Israel. Israel's saying, look, we realize what's going on in the world. Most Israelis are accepting the fact that there are going to be Palestinians around and Lebanese around and Jordanians around who hate us. We also see that there are some who love us and are thankful that we're pushing back. But when Donald Trump, an outsider, comes in and says, wait a minute, logically, if we moved people out of Syria, why can't we move out of Gaza? Everybody says, how dare you? Because there's a double standard when it comes to the Jews and, frankly, when it comes to Americans, too.
Yeah, okay. One last question. Israel forced every single Jew out of Gaza when they handed it over to the Palestinians and gave them total control in 2005. Is there an argument now to be made for Israeli Jews resettling Gaza?
It's amazing the speed with which after October 7th people went back to the two-state solution without acknowledging the fact that indeed, as in 2005, Jews were left every single inch of Gaza. And they gave it to the Palestinians, and they still claimed it was occupied. And they still claimed it was the world's largest concentration camp. And they still threw these lies at us. And so it's very, very hard for most Israelis to say, well, let's go back to two-state solution thinking. Let's go back to giving them autonomy, because they used their autonomy not to build up Gaza into a beautiful Middle Eastern Riviera, but to build it into Hamasistan. And that's not just bad for Israel. That's bad for America and bad for the West, too. So there's concerns. What do you do? one of the most important things is whether we'll sidestep the debate about whether you bring Jews back in to Gaza, but certainly, and the hostage agreement says this, there has to be a DMZ, a demilitarized zone of about 1 kilometer, keeping the Palestinians away from the Jewish villages in Israel. And that, by the way, is one of the great achievements of the hostage agreement. And for the first time, Palestinians have lost land since 1967, and that's the language they understand. Hamas understands the loss of land. And so don't believe all the celebrations on the streets of Gaza. They know they lost land, they know they lost people, they know they lost their weaponry, and we are going to win.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Gil Troy, Jerusalem Post columnist and author of the new book, To Resist the Academic Intifada.
Thank you.